Welcome everyone. Melachim Bet, chapter 11. So, what we saw last time was we saw that there was a king of Israel called Yehu. He wasn't the king originally. He was anointed to be the one to avenge the house of Achav. He wipes out the descendants of Achav, and he's going to start a new line of kings. He's promised 4 generations of kings of Yehu, of the kings of Israel. And even though Yehu was good, even though he made a mistake, as we saw last time, and he didn't remove the idolatry of Yerovam, but his kids were not really good. So he wipes out the line of Achav. And we also saw that he wiped out a lot of the line, the king of Judah at the time, the name is Achaziah, who was really married into the family of Achav. There was an overlap we saw that happened from Asa taking a sister of Achav, and then afterwards his son Yehoshaphat took a daughter of Achav as for his son. And that's what we're up to right now. So a lot of the kings of Judah got wiped out also. The king himself, Achaziah, and some of his servants. But I want to say one other thing about the line of Yehuda now, because they're really diminished. Why is that? Because the king Achaziah, when he became king, so what he did was when his I'm sorry, not Achaziah, Yehoram, the son of the father of Achaziah, when he first became king from his righteous father Yehoshaphat, he killed his brothers. Remember, we say he killed his brothers. So a lot of the line there is wiped out. He had numerous sons. This Yehoram, who was the son of Yehoshaphat, the righteous Yehoshaphat, he had numerous sons. This guy Yehoshaphat, I'm sorry, this guy Yehoram, and his sons were killed in a war with the Ishmaelim, and because he was leaving the ways of Hashem. The only one that remained was this son Achaziah, who was the only one that remained in the wars that happened through the battles that he had because he had left Hashem. So the guy that was killed now by Yehu, the king, Achaziah, he really has no uncles, and he really had no brothers. Now he's killed. So he has some sons, but what's going to happen is we're going to see, because remember, this king of Judah, his mother was the daughter of Achav. That's how we got into a problem in the first place. She was a very evil woman. Her name's Atalia. Now, when Atalia saw that her son was killed, her son Achaziah, there's really no one left in the line of the king except for the children of Achaziah, who are the grandchildren of the mother Atalia. So what does she do? She goes and she decides she wants the power. She's the descendant of Achav. She kills his children, her own grandchildren. She kills them. She poisons them, which was always the death of choice of the kings in the old days. That's the famous story why they clipped the glasses together to see if it was being poisoned. But the point was she poisoned her own grandchildren, and she ascended to the throne. So he had this bizarre thing that after Yehu had killed the line of Achav, and after he had killed also the king of Judah, who had very few relatives in the Davidic line, the mother of the king of Judah is the daughter of Achav. She kills her own grandchildren, the lines of the king. And this is a very crucial moment because this could be the end of the Davidic dynasty. King David himself in Psalms writes about it. In one of the Psalms, on the 8th, and he's referring to this 8th generation of his kingship. And he prays to Hashem to save his line. Okay, and there's a verse there. It says that you hide me in your sukkah. And this is referring to what's happening right now. There's almost no one left in the line of David. Athaliah has killed them all. After she poisons them, there was a baby, a 1-year-old child, who was taken by his aunt, Yoshava, and hid. So Athaliah doesn't know that there is one descendant left. She doesn't know where it happened to him, but the baby is taken with her, with the baby's nurse, and hidden. This child is called Yehoash. Yoash or Yehoash, different ways it's pronounced. And this is the only descendant of David now, the male descendants that's in the royal line of the kings. It means if he's wiped out, that's it. And the Medrash says that in the story back in the time of David, not his fault, but when he goes to the city of Nov, and because of that, Shaul comes and kills the whole city of Nov, and only one Cohen remains. The Medrash says that if that one Cohen wouldn't have remained, and it would have been David's fault, they all got wiped out, then no descendants of David would have remained. Because one remained of the Kohanim that was killed, not David's intentional fault, but Shaul thought that David was going there to the city of Nov to rebel against him, and he kills the whole city, but one remained. So too David had one seed that remained, and this is this child Yehoash. Now, what we're going to see now is we're going to get into the line of the kings of Judah, numerous ones, and it's weird right now because they are all essentially righteous, but there's going to be a classic mistake that's going to happen in each of them for numerous generations now, for the next few generations. On the other side, the kings of Israel are not going to be that good. They may have a redeeming quality, but not so good. So let's start with Yehoash. Yehoash was hidden, the only descendant of David, hidden with his nursemaid by the high priest of Kohen Gadol, Yehoiada. Yehoiada hides Yoash. Now, he hid him for 6 years in the temple area. Different discussions in the Medrash where exactly he hid him. It's called the Cheder HaMitot, the bedroom, which, according to one opinion in the Midrash, is the place of the love and connection between God and the Jewish people. That's why it's called the room of the beds, where we connect. So according to this opinion in the Medrash, Yehoash was hidden by the high priest, and the aunt that hid him was his wife. Yoshava was the wife of Yehoiada, was hidden in the Holy of Holies, in the attic, the Ta, in the upper area, in the Holy of Holies, was hidden there with his nursemaid for 6 years and not found. Meantime, Athaliah, the daughter of Achav, is ruling Judah, and she is evil. She is basically destroying the temple, taking all of the treasures, using it for idolatry, and abandoning everything. Now, there is still obviously some righteous people, and quite a few of the people of Judah itself were still righteous, but she has brought idolatry in, the service of the Baal and other idols she's bringing in to Judah, and really abandoning the temple area, stealing the things from the temple. They're becoming in total disarray as she builds up the service of the idolatry of the Baal, which was Achav's, her father's, trademark. All right, now, so 6 years he's hidden. Yoash is hidden in the Holy of Holies. When he's 7 years old, so the high priest Yehoiada goes to the other priests and says, listen, Levites, he says to them, okay, now is the time. The king is alive. There is a line of David that's still alive. We've been hiding him. And now is the time. We're going to inaugurate him as the king. He waited to do it on Shabbos. On Shabbos, the what's called the Mishmarot, the guard, the Kohanim that served in the temple would switch. So there was a double amount, the ones that were finishing and the new group that was coming in. So he planned this rebellion against Italia on the day that, on Shabbos, when there was going to be more of the Kohanim and the Levim in Jerusalem, and he plans that. All of a sudden, he tells them where to go. Each one has a spot to guard the king, to go to guard the temple. He brings out the king, and they blow the shofar, and people, the king, long live the king. Atalia hears this, and she comes charging in. What's going on here? A rebellion, and tries to gather people. But Yehoiada has the whole thing planned out. And he says, bring her out quickly outside of the temple of Hashem and kill her. And she is killed. They inaugurate this 7-year-old king, Yehoash, and he becomes the king of Israel. 40 years, a righteous king. And the text says that he was righteous. He did what's right in the eyes of Hashem all the days of the high priest Yehoiada. Okay. So Yehoash is a righteous person, saved from the house of David. That he continues the line, the Davidic line, and now something that's just very, very strange happens, and a lot of the story here and the negative parts of the kings of Judah you don't even see in the text in the book of Kings. You have to look in the book of Chronicles and Divrei Yamim, where it fleshes out some of the other problems. Because in the text it says he did what was right in the eyes of Hashem all the days of the high priest Yehoiada. So the sages tell us, what does it mean all the days of Yehoiada? It means that once the high priest died, he started to go sour. Now, how did he go sour? What exactly happened? And this is where we need to refer to a text in Pirkei Avos that says there are 3 things that take a person out of the world. Kina, Taiva, and Kavod. 3 things take a person out of the world, can destroy a person totally. One is unbridled desire. One is jealousy. A person gets jealous, they'll do anything. You know, it's a story we saw with Yeravam. He was jealous of David and Shlomo. He wouldn't acquiesce to anything because of his jealousy. The third thing is honor, the pursuit of honor. And this is a very deep point, because what happens when a person starts to feel themselves as being above everything, then that's trouble, and that will drive a person out of this world. And that is what happened to Yehoash, the righteous Yehoash. It says in Divrei Yamim Chronicles, it says that after the high priest Yehoiada died, the leaders came and they bowed down to him. Okay, now the simple explanation is they gave him honor, and they said, we're going to support you and we're going to honor you. You listen to us, we'll listen to you. And then they pushed him towards idolatry. The sages tell us another thing that happened when they bowed down to him. Now, I'm going to say it on 2 levels, because it could be on the simple level, they just fed his ego. But at a deeper level, the rabbis tell us something else, and we have to put the 2 together. The rabbis say they bowed down to him, and they said the following. They said, you know, there's a law that no person who is not the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies. You know, during the time of the Second Temple, when there were not righteous high priests that would serve, they died every year. The Talmud says they tie something to his leg, they could pull him out if he died. Going into the Holy Holies is the most dangerous thing if you're not worthy. And you, Yehoash, you just lived 6 years in there, you lived. You're a god. And it said Yehoash believed them. Now, I don't know if it means that I don't know how people think they're gods. It's a little weird, you know, but in other words, he just felt himself becoming so elevated and so above everyone that he started to leave the ways of Hashem. And even though the text doesn't, in Malachim, doesn't really go and say it was bad, it just hints that he was good all the days of Yehoiada, But the sages tell us that no, he started to then be influenced by the other officers who fed his ego, tell him he's some kind of a god, and he started acting that way. Once he did, things started to fall apart. Aram, the Aram kingdom in the north, they came to attack, and Yehoash, who just, one of the great things that he is known for doing was that when he was first became the king and he saw the disarray the temple was in, he made a national campaign to rebuild the temple. And the text goes through all these things he did. He gathered the money. He sent the Kohanim to go and to get money to rebuild the temple and to build the treasury and all these things for the honor of Hashem. What he ended up doing then was when he saw that the king of Aram was going to come and attack him, he gave the treasures of the temple, sent them to the king of Aram, which is bizarre because even though he built the temple itself, but the thing he was trying to do in his great work, which was to establish the temple, he ended up undermining himself from what he did by giving it to the king of Aram to try to get him off his back. Now, that was a sign from Hashem, you're going in the wrong direction. Not only that, after this happened, Hashem sent the prophets to warn Yehoash, you're going off. Now, one of the great prophets that rebuked him, who was also the new Kohen Gadol, the new high priest after the death of his father, Yehoiada, was named Zechariah. Zechariah ben Yehoiada. And what happened was he started rebuking the king and saying, this thing with Aram is going to be your undoing. This is not going away because you've now, I guess with your haughtiness, you've left Hashem and you started doing idolatry, doing other things that you felt were okay for you. And now what happens is it says that when the high priest, the new high priest, the son of Yehoiada, who had saved Yehoash, his son Zechariah, started rebuking the people, he was there in the temple rebuking the people. He was the high priest. He was the prophet. He was the leader. And it was on Yom Kippur. And Yehoash couldn't take it because a person who's haughty doesn't want to be told they're wrong. And he sent a message to kill Zechariah. And they killed Zechariah in the temple of Hashem. And we're going to see this later because whatever it means, the sages tell us that the blood of Zechariah is going to be bubbling for years. They whatever it means, physically, spiritually, they try to clean it. They can't clean it. Can't get rid of it. The blood stain of what happened at that moment when they killed the high priest of Israel in the temple of Hashem on Yom Kippur that fell on Shabbat. That whole thing, that was a holy moment that the rebuke came to Yehoash, and he says, no one's telling me what to do. I guess he rationalizes and says, you're not allowed to go and rebuke the king or whatever, because it's rebelling against the king. He probably rationalized it, but he killed the prophet of Hashem, and therefore that was the end. And once he did that, now Hashem had sent Aram again. This time they came in. This time they conquered. They cleaned out whatever was remaining. They did a lot of damage to Judah, and they took Yoash and they beat him. They tortured him. They beat him, and they left him alive. But they left. Took all the stuff. Now they had a new control over Judah, and they left. And now it says that that when people saw this, the servants of the king, when he was sick and in the bed, they went in and they finished the job. They killed him. In Divrei Yomim, it brings up the name of them in both places, but in Divrei Yomim it says the people that killed the king Yoash, it says one of them, his mother was a Moabite, and one of them, his mother was an Ammonite. And the Talmud says, why do I need to know? I mean, Moses already converted because they were Jewish, so why do I need to know the Moabs and Ammonite and Moabite? So Talmud answers because the Moabim and the Ammonim, who were descendants of Lot, who was saved because of Abraham, and yet they were ingrates. They had no gratitude, and they went to fight against the Jews and hired Bilam to kill them in the desert, even though they owed the Jews everything. They owed the Jews their lives. They were only saved because of the merit of Abraham, the Jewish people. So the Talmud, the Medrash says, because the ungratitude of Yehoash, that he ended up killing the high priest whose father had saved his own life. Because of that, he also should get it that the ingrates, the descendants of the ingrates, should also be the ones to take his life. And they killed Yehoash. Bizarre story, very bizarre story, but the righteousness of a person, and it really does seem from this text, because even though in Chronicles it does talk about how he went off, but it never says he didn't do right, didn't do good in the eyes of God. It's the people started going away. It still paints him as a righteous person. So it seems that he had a lot of greatness in him, but the haughtiness got to him, and he couldn't take it anymore, and he couldn't be told what to do. Okay, now he has a son, and similarly, and this is going to also be in the line of Yehuda, a son who is going to be very, very righteous in the beginning. Okay? His name is Amaziah, and he is a righteous king. He's very righteous. But again, something goes off. What goes off? So he's a righteous king. Now, on the other side of in Israel, there are the descendants of this guy Yehu, who were not so good. Okay, who were they? So the first descendant of Yehu is Yehoachaz. Yehoachaz is the son of Yehu, and he's not a good guy. And he is just losing the power of the kingdom because he keeps getting attacked by Aram. I don't know if you remember, but we said before that when Elisha met and he inaugurated Hazael was the new king Aram, he cried because he said, "I'd see what you're going to do to Israel." And this really happens during this time of Yehoachaz, the son of Yehu, where Aram is just destroying Israel. There's a few warriors left. They're really to the point where it says that Yehoachaz cried out to Hashem, even though he's an idolater, cried out to Hashem because he's like, "Help us." And it's Hashem heard his prayer, partially because he prayed to Hashem, but also it says because he saw the pain that was happening to Israel, and he is going to give them some reprieve, the Israelite kingdom, from Aram, and that's going to really come in the form of the son of Yehoachaz, whose also his name is going to be Yehoash. It's a little tricky here. Yehoash, again, the line of Yehu, who becomes the second of the four kings that are going to be merited from Yehu, comes this person named Yehoash. Now, Yehoash is the king of.
Some results from the web.
I'm sorry. Yehoash is the king of Israel, and I have to bring him into this discussion because even when we're talking about the kings of Judah, and we were talking about, but there's going to be a split between the two. Even though they were married before into each other, now there's going to be a break. So let's see what happens here. So we're going to go to the kings of Israel, and then we'll come back to the kings of Judah. So now Yehoash is the king of Israel, and what happens is he starts fighting against Aram, and he's going to have some success. Now, how does that work? So the king, the famous prophet Elisha, we haven't heard about much lately, was sick. Okay, he'd gotten sick before. We mentioned he had made some mistakes. even though he's the greatest of the great, he made a mistake. He made a mistake, we said, and he had to kill those 42 kids in that story we talked about earlier. Got sick once. He also got sick another time, where afterwards he pushed away Gehazi with 2 hands. And now he got sick for the 3rd time. This is going to be the final time. And now the king of Israel comes to visit him. And this is very bizarre because he's an idolater, but he cries. He's crying, oh, the leader of Israel, who's going to defend us? So it says that Elisha said to him, he hears his pain and the pain of Israel. And he says, okay, open the window and take an arrow and shoot it and towards Aram. He does. And he says to him, okay, this is the arrows that Hashem is going to send for you to beat Aram. And then he gives him a quiver and he says to him, go ahead, shoot the arrows out against Aram. And now the king of Israel goes and he shoots 3 arrows and he stops. And Elisha says, what did you do? I told you to do the act, to go and to send them all. If you'd have said more, you would have killed them more. You sent 3 arrows, and only 3 times are you going to beat Aram, and that's it. So again, as we talked about before, this is the way that the prophecies work. That you have to bring it into the world of reality. But in this case, even though Elisha prayed for this king of Israel, and I guess he felt it was silly, like I'm shooting all the arrows. And that not trusting in the prophet Elisha to really let it all out in Aram is going to backfire. So this king, the new king of Israel, Joash, is going to fight against Aram, and he's going to settle things against Aram and sort of put them in their place. But only 3 times he beats them. He's not able to destroy them entirely because he did not fully do what Elisha had told him. Okay, that is in the line of Israel and their battles. Now, the reason why I had to go over to that was that now I'm coming back to the king of Judah, Amaziah. The reason why I had to say that is because Amaziah was a righteous king, and he was fighting the wars, and he was really doing what was great in the eyes of Hashem. And the text says so. The text says he served Hashem. It says not fully, he wasn't fully righteous as he should have been, but he was a righteous person. At one point, he wants to gather an army together, and he gets the people of Judah. He also gets mercenary warriors from Israel. And this is interesting because the relationship between Israel and Judah are brothers in a certain way. Even though there's a split, there's a certain level of brotherhood. And the Talmud says that, when you go out to war, you have to remember it's not like fighting against, Israel against Judah, where they'll have compassion. Fighting against another nation, they won't. But Israel and Judah, even though they were separate kingdoms, there's a certain level of compassion and connection. So he hires mercenaries for his army that going to go out with him to war for Judah. Now, these mercenaries, though, the prophet comes and says, don't use the mercenaries from the tribes of Israel, because the tribes of Israel have really gone off. They are not as righteous as the people of Judah, and they have the idolatry that's been steeped into them from the time of Yerovam, and the prophet says, get rid of them, don't use them. Okay, so at this point, Amaziah is the king of Judah, is a righteous king, and listens. He says, okay, I'm not. He sends them away, and they're angry. The mercenaries who have been hired, now he sends them back to Israel, and he gathers the Judah troops, and he goes out to war. He goes and he fights Edom, and he routs them, and he beats them. A couple things happen though when he fights Edom. One is a story that he gathers the people, the captives, and he actually pushes them. He gathers a group of them, and they kill them. They push them. It's brought in Chronicles. They push them off this cliff, and they kill them. And I guess the rationale why Amaziah did is to show them, put them in their place. But there's a teaching in the Talmud that says that at that point Hashem said, "What's this cruelty?" And at that moment, actually, the beginning of the destruction of Jerusalem was set into place. It's strange because the reality is you're fighting a war, and you have to be strong, and but you have to also know when not to cross the line. And Amatzia crossed the line, and it is a war with Edom. Now, but something else happened that's even worse. A very bizarre thing that happened here. After he conquers Edom, he also brings back with him some of the idolatry of Edom. And even though it doesn't say it in the book of Kings, it only hints at it. In the book of Divrei Yamim, it says it more clearly that they served this idol, that the king Amatzi himself served this idol, the righteous. Now, how does that work? How do you understand that? And we need to explain this. We'll get to this more, but we have to understand, first of all, that the issue of idolatry we'll discuss was a very, very powerful desire in the world, which was removed by the sages in the time of the beginning of the Second Temple period. But now it's a very, very powerful desire. The desire happens because when a person wants, in a certain way, spirituality, there has to be an equal and opposite power. And that was the desire for idolatry. Okay, and that's really why when the power of idolatry is removed from the world, even the power for spiritual growth is removed, as we will discuss in the future. But that's a very powerful desire. Now, where does it come from? What is the root of this? I understand that there's a power, a person to get close to Hashem, and that's the positive side. There has to be an equal and opposite challenge. So that's the power for idolatry. And it has to happen. But where is the flaw in the human being that leads to idolatry? So I started out this session, we talked about the three things that take a person out of this world. And we said there were desire, unbridled desire, okay, and there was jealousy, and it was honor. Those three things represent the three cardinal sins. Okay, so how's that? Desire is the basis of the cardinal sin that persons give their life up for of illicit relations. Person commits illicit relations, it comes from unbridled desire. Jealousy is the root of the cardinal sin persons give their life up for of murder. Someone says, kill this person, we'll kill you. Person says, willing to be killed. And we see the first murder in history was by Cain, who killed Hevel because of jealousy. The third of the three traits that lead a person out of the world, and is also the root of the third of the cardinal sins the person gives life up for, is, it says, honor, which is the basis of the cardinal sin of idolatry. Now, how does that work? I don't understand. The other ones make sense. But how is it that a person who wants to serve idols wants honor? It would seem that no, he doesn't want honor. He's honoring the idol. How is that his own honor when idolatry is serving an idol? And the answer is like this. When a person serves Hashem, you realize there's no games you could play because Hashem knows everything and you can't fool God. The power of idolatry was the ability to manipulate the world, taking the spiritual forces, either the side of good or the side of evil, and trying to manipulate them. That was the root of idolatry. Idolatry wasn't only stupid people of, bowing down to wood and this and that, but the deeper understanding was they were trying to manipulate spiritual forces that were connected to these physical things, the malachim, the servants of Hashem, and saying the names of these different forces and how they did it. And they were going to manipulate the spiritual world to get what they wanted without having to go to the source. That was the basis of idolatry. So really what it is the service of self. If I can go and say this incantation and affect this spiritual force and get what I want, that means I'm the one in charge, not really the idol. And that's really why idolatry is connected to the search of honor. Because when a person really serves Hashem, he realizes that it's not about my honor. I have to become nullified and subservient to the source. When I can manipulate the system, so I'm serving myself. That could be what happened with Amatzia here. And some commentaries say he didn't really serve it in that way. He didn't believe it was a god. He didn't believe this because he was a righteous person. But somehow, when he got in his world enamored with what were the Edomites doing to create their own situation, he ended up putting himself in a situation where he somehow connected with this kind of service in some type of way that knocked him out. And whatever it was, whatever his haughtiness, whatever his confidence all of a sudden in himself, I fought this war, I won, I threw these people off the cliff, whatever it was that happened in him that broke him from being such a righteous person, ended up, he followed into some type of manipulation of the system of Edom to see what they were doing, to figure it out. To be part of some way. He didn't think he was breaking off from God, but he thought he was manipulating something in some kind of way. And once he does that, he's finished. And the text says the prophet comes and tells him, you better straighten out because you're going in the wrong way. And if you do this, Hashem is going to bring out the flaw in yourself and you can be finished. And so it happened. Once he broke his heart away because of his haughtiness, it says the mercenaries he had first hired from Israel, who he sent away, and he didn't go with them to the war for the Edom. They came back and they killed some people from Judah, and they plundered some of the spoils. And now Amatzia said, "Oh, now I'm going to go and take revenge from Israel, from the 10 tribes." And this is what the sages tell us, that Hashem evoked in him, tripped him up because of his own flaw. And what happened was he sent him on this fight that he was going to lose. And he sent a message to the king of Israel, who had been, successful against Aram numerous times now, as we said, and said, get ready for a war against me. And the king of Israel said to him, hey, don't, you're like the thorn bush and I'm the cedar tree. You're going to come and fight against me? You got yourself so cocky because you won against Edom. You're going to fight against me? Don't do that and knock yourself and Judah out, which actually seemed to be that he cared about his brethren to a certain degree. But Amatzia his heart was hard and he was already too self-confident. He goes and he fights against Israel and he gets vanquished. They break the entrances into Israel. They take whatever treasures away. They destroy and they win. And Amatzia now has to flee. He abdicates the throne and he runs away to an area called Lachish. It says that a person, when they go into exile, the sages tell us it's a cure for haughtiness, because you don't know who you are anymore. The king had to run away, but it didn't help him, because it helped him for 15 years when he was in hiding. But eventually his servants, from this terrible defeat that happened to Judah in the hands of Israel, and the breaking of the walls and the destruction, things that they pulled away, they tracked him down in Lachish and they killed the king Amatzia. So that's what we saw today. We saw a little continuation of the two lines of Judah and the line of Israel. The line of Israel, although they were not righteous, some redeeming qualities. We saw the first descendant of Yehu was not a good guy. He prayed to Hashem to help him with Aram. Hashem answered him to a certain, even though he's an idolater. His son, we saw, his name was Yehoash. We saw although he was also an idolater, he cried before the king before Elisha the prophet to lose him, and he also had some redeeming qualities. On the other side, the line of Judah were very, very righteous, but they had a flaw. They had a serious flaw. And so the one descendant that remained from David, Jehoash, the king of Israel, of Judah, he was very righteous when he had tutelage from Jehoiada, the high priest. Once that was lost, his haughtiness got to him. They said to him, "You listen. You grew up in the Holy of Holies. You're like a god. You are God." So his haughtiness got to him, and he started going off the path. He ended up getting killed by his own people after losing the war. And then his son Amaziah was also righteous, but when he conquered Edom and he was too full of himself, it led to idolatry, to trying to manipulate the forces of the world to also get his own honor. And it ended up that he went out to war against Israel, lost, and eventually had to flee the kingdom and be killed by his own servants for taking them into a terrible mistake of a battle he should never have fought. Okay, so let's keep our not get our haughtiness, let it get to us. Realize that yes, we are great because we are an extension with Tselem Elohim. We are in the divine image, and we go back to the root of haughtiness in the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, when the Nachash says, the serpent says, "V'yisem Kelokim," you could be like God. And that's really the trick, because when a person says, "I want to be like God," so what does that mean? If it means, if you say to someone, to the son, you say, "You're just like your father." He said, "Well, yes, because I'm an extension of my father, and it's very beautiful." He said, "Yeah, I don't need him. I'm just like him." Then you fall into the problem of Adam and Chava in the Garden of Eden, where the snake said, "You could be like God. God ate from this tree and he created the worlds from that. You could be your own independent power who is not connected back to the source." That is the root of idolatry. And that's why idolatry really stems from a search of honor and not knowing a person's place, that they are an extension of the one who deserves all the honor, which is Hashem. Okay, thank you all, and we'll pick it up later.